The air inside the house always tasted sweet. It was a specific flavor, a blend of my mother's cinnamon potpourri and the faint, ever-present scent of lemon polish she used on the antique sideboard in the hall. As my car crunched up the gravel driveway, the sound muffled by a fresh blanket of snow, I took a deep breath of the cold, sharp December air, trying to hold onto its clean neutrality before plunging into that syrupy sweetness. The house stood exactly as it always did, a perfect two-story colonial postcard, every window lit with a warm, golden candle, a wreath on the deep red door so perfectly symmetrical it looked like something out of a magazine. It was Christmas Eve. It was home. Or at least, it was supposed to be. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The drive had been 6 hours, a long, hypnotic stretch of gray highway and swirling snow, and the tension had coiled in my stomach with every mile. I'd spent the last hour coaching myself. Just be pleasant, Chloe. Smile. Don't take the bait. It's only for 48 hours. It was a mantra I'd repeated every year for the past decade, and every year, it failed. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was immense, broken only by the soft tick-tick-tick of the cooling metal. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath under the heavy, white sky. I could see them through the big bay window in the living room. My father, Robert, in his usual armchair, a newspaper held up like a shield. My mother, Eleanor, gliding back and forth, a phantom in an apron, her movements fluid and purposeful. And my sister, Jessica, perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture perfect, her blonde hair catching the light from the towering Christmas tree like a halo. Her husband, Mark, sat beside her, looking solid and expensive in a cashmere sweater. The perfect family, frozen in a perfect moment. I was the rock about to be tossed into their placid pond. Finally, I pulled the handle, and the car door groaned in the cold. The air bit at my cheeks, a bracing, honest cold that felt better than the recycled warmth waiting for me. I pulled my worn duffel bag from the back seat, its strap digging into my shoulder. My boots sank into the snow, the crisp crunching sound echoing in the stillness. The front door swung open before I even reached the first step. Chloe. You're here. My mother's voice was like warm honey, but it always had a slightly brittle edge, like spun sugar that could crack at any moment. She stood framed in the doorway, the warm light of the hall spilling out onto the snow around her. She was beautiful, elegant even in her festive apron, her silver hair styled impeccably. Hi, Mom. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face feeling stiff from the cold and the long drive. I trudged up the 3 steps, my boots leaving wet, melting tracks on the pristine porch. She wrapped me in a hug that was both tight and strangely distant. I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive, mingling with the scent of roasting turkey. It was the smell of my childhood, a scent that promised comfort and delivered judgment in equal measure. She held me at arm's length, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. It wasn't a loving gaze, it was an assessment. You look tired, dear, she said, her voice dropping a register. That drive is just too much. And that coat, it looks a little thin for this weather, doesn't it? I was wearing a perfectly good down-filled parka, but I knew this wasn't about the coat. It was about my choices. It was about my small apartment in the city, my job at a nonprofit that paid me in satisfaction instead of stock options, my life that was so incomprehensibly different from the one she'd mapped out for me. I was warm enough, Mom. It's good to see you. I stepped past her into the familiar warmth of the foyer. The wave of heat was immediate, wrapping around me like a blanket. The air was thick with the scent of pine from the massive tree that dominated the living room and the rich, savory aroma of the Christmas Eve feast in progress. It was a sensory assault designed to lull you into a state of nostalgic bliss. Chloe. My father's voice was a low rumble from the living room. He lowered his newspaper, his face crinkling into a genuine smile. He was a kind man, but his kindness was a soft, yielding thing, easily flattened by my mother's will. He stood up, his joints creaking a little, and gave me a real hug, a solid, comforting squeeze that smelled of old books and peppermint. Good to have you home, kiddo, he murmured into my hair. Hey, sis. Jessica's voice cut through the warm moment. She hadn't moved from the sofa. She just tilted her head, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She was the polished version of me. We had the same dark hair, the same blue eyes, but on her, they were set in a face that was smoother, more serene. Her life was as curated as our mother's home. Successful lawyer, wealthy husband, a 2.5 kids and a golden retriever future already under construction. Jess. Mark. I nodded at them, my smile feeling more like a grimace. Mark gave me a lazy wave. He and I had never connected. He operated on a level of ambition and financial jargon that was like a foreign language to me. "Let me take that bag, dear," my mother said, reaching for my duffel. "You must be starving. Dinner is almost ready. We were just waiting for you." The implication was clear: you were late. "You've held us all up." "I'll just run it upstairs," I said, clutching the strap tighter. I needed a moment, a few minutes to decompress before the performance began. "Nonsense, I'll get it. You go wash up. You're in your old room, of course." She pried the bag from my fingers with surprising strength. My old room. It was a museum of a person I no longer was, frozen in time at age 18. The walls were still the same pale lavender, the shelves lined with dusty paperback novels and tarnished track and field trophies. My mother refused to change it, claiming a sentimental attachment. But I knew the truth. It was a way of reminding me that the person I was now was a stranger, an unwelcome deviation from the girl who used to live in that room. I made my way up the carpeted staircase, the wood groaning softly under my weight. The air was warmer up here, still thick with the smells from the kitchen. I passed my parents' room, the door slightly ajar, and then Jessica's old room, which had been converted into a pristine guest room with a Pottery Barn aesthetic years ago. Mine was at the end of the hall. Pushing the door open, I was hit with the faint, sweet smell of old paper and dried flowers. Everything was exactly as I'd left it 15 years ago. The faded band posters on the wall, the corkboard still pinned with photos of high school friends I hadn't spoken to in a decade. My mother had placed my duffel bag neatly at the foot of the twin bed with its lumpy, floral comforter. I ran a hand over the scarred surface of my old wooden desk, the initials of a long-forgotten high school crush still carved into the corner. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. It felt less like coming home and more like visiting a grave. I splashed cold water on my face in the adjoining bathroom, the pipes rattling in protest. Looking in the mirror, I saw the weariness my mother had so quickly pointed out. There were faint lines around my eyes that hadn't been there last Christmas. I took a deep breath, straightened my sweater, and went back downstairs to play my part. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. My mother, at the head of the table, orchestrated the conversation like a conductor. The table itself was a work of art. The good china, the silver polished to a blinding sheen, a centerpiece of holly and flickering red candles. The food was, as always, incredible. Perfectly roasted turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, savory stuffing, a glistening cranberry sauce that quivered in its crystal bowl. "Mark just made partner at the firm," my mother announced, her voice beaming with a pride that was never, ever directed at me. "We are just so thrilled. Tell them, Mark." Mark cleared his throat and launched into a modest but detailed account of his success, while Jessica gazed at him with practiced adoration. I pushed a piece of turkey around my plate, the rich food suddenly feeling heavy and indigestible in my stomach. "That's wonderful, Mark." "Congratulations," I said when he finally paused for breath. "Thank you, Chloe," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "It's a lot of work, but the rewards are substantial." A subtle dig at my chosen profession. "And Jessica's charity auction raised over $200,000 last month," my mother continued, her gaze sweeping over to me. "She has such a gift for organizing things. For making things happen." "It was nothing, really," Jessica demurred, but she was glowing. "It's just about knowing the right people." The conversation continued like that, a relentless volley of my sister's achievements and my own perceived failures. They didn't ask about my work, not really. My mother once referred to it as my little hobby. They asked if I was dating anyone, and when I said no, my mother sighed a theatrical, long-suffering sigh. A girl needs stability, Chloe. You're not getting any younger. This bohemian lifestyle is fine for a while, but eventually you have to grow up. The word bohemian was delivered like an insult, a diagnosis for a disease. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. My father, sensing the shift in temperature, cleared his throat. More wine, anyone? He asked, his voice a little too loud. He busied himself with the bottle, a strategic retreat into a simple task. I'm happy, Mom, I said, my voice low and tight. Are you, dear? She asked, her eyebrows arching in perfectly sculpted disbelief. Running yourself ragged for a cause that doesn't even pay you enough to buy a decent winter coat? That was it. The bait. The little jab that was designed to make me snap. I looked across the table at Jessica, who was watching me with a look of detached pity, and I felt something inside me break. The carefully constructed wall of pleasantness I'd built around myself began to crumble. My coat is fine, I said, my fork clattering against the china plate. And my job actually helps people. It does something good in the world. It's not just about knowing the right people or making partner. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's jaw tightened. Jessica's pity morphed into a cold glare. My father froze, the wine bottle hovering over a glass. My mother's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. What, exactly, are you implying, Chloe? She asked, her voice dangerously soft. I'm not implying anything, I retorted, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. I'm just saying that my life has value, too. Even if it doesn't look like yours. Even if I'm not spending my weekends at country clubs or planning charity auctions for rich people to pat themselves on the back. That is a vile thing to say, Jessica snapped, her voice sharp as glass. You have no idea how hard I work. Oh, I'm sure you do. It must be exhausting picking out canapes and floral arrangements. Chloe, that's enough, my father warned, his voice a low plea. Why? I demanded, turning to him. Why is it enough? Why can't we ever just have one honest conversation in this house? Why does everything have to be a performance? This perfect family in this perfect house with this perfect goddamn Christmas dinner. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished wood floor. My hands were shaking. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, hot and angry. You come into this house for one night, my mother said, her voice trembling with rage, and you try to tear it all down. You are ungrateful. After everything we've given you, everything we've done for you, you have the audacity to speak to us like this? What have you given me? I shot back, my voice cracking. An inferiority complex and a room you've turned into a shrine for a daughter you actually liked? The slap was so fast I didn't see it coming. My mother's hand, so elegant and manicured, struck my cheek with a force that made my head snap to the side. The sting was sharp, electric. The sound of it echoed in the sudden, horrified silence of the room. The air filled with the coppery scent of my own blood, where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. No one moved. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on their stunned faces. Jessica's mouth was a perfect O of shock. My father looked broken, his face pale and slack. My mother stood there, her hand still raised slightly, her chest heaving. The pain in my cheek was nothing compared to the cold, hollow ache in my chest. This was it. The final crack in the facade. The sweetness of the house had finally, irrevocably, turned to ash in my mouth. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the dining room. I took the stairs two at a time, the sound of my footsteps thudding a desperate rhythm against the silence. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. Not for one more minute. In my room, I grabbed my duffel bag from the foot of the bed and threw it open on the floor. I started yanking clothes from the small closet, my movements jerky and frantic. Sweaters, jeans, socks, I didn't care what I was grabbing. I just needed to be gone. My old suitcase, a large, hard-shelled monstrosity from the 1990s, was probably in the attic. I'd need it if I was going to take everything. And I was going to take everything. Every last trace of the girl they wanted me to be. The attic door was a small, square panel in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway. My father had rigged a pull cord to it years ago. I tugged on the tasseled cord, and the door swung down with a soft whoosh, releasing a cascade of cool, dusty air. The scent was of time itself, old wood, decaying paper, and the faint, spicy smell of mothballs. The folding wooden ladder concertinaed down, its joints groaning in protest. I climbed, each step creaking under my weight. The attic was a vast, shadowy space under the eaves of the house. A single, bare bulb hung from a rafter, casting a weak, yellow circle of light and leaving the corners in deep, mysterious darkness. The air was frigid, a stark contrast to the cloying heat of the rest of the house. My breath plumed in front of me. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust that looked like gray snow. It was a graveyard of forgotten things. Stacks of old magazines, boxes of holiday decorations, furniture shrouded in white sheets like ghosts. My suitcase was over by the far wall, behind a stack of what looked like my dad's old accounting boxes. As I squeezed past them, my hip knocked one of the cardboard boxes, and it tipped over, spilling its contents onto the dusty floorboards. "Great," I muttered, my voice sounding small and thin in the cavernous space. I knelt down, the cold from the floor seeping through the knees of my jeans. It was mostly old tax records, neat folders full of brittle, yellowing paper. But as I started stuffing them back into the box, my fingers brushed against something hard and leather-bound. It wasn't a folder. It was a heavy, dark green ledger, the kind lawyers use for important documents. On the front, embossed in faded gold leaf, were the words, "Fairwood Farms Estate Planning." Fairwood Farms was the name of our family property, the sprawling acres of land and the old farmhouse that had been in my father's family for generations. This house, the one we lived in, was built on a corner of that land. Curiosity, cold and sharp, cut through my anger. I sat back on my heels, the dust motes dancing in the weak light around me. My heart started to beat a little faster. This felt secret. Hidden. I ran my thumb over the embossed letters and opened the cover. Inside, tucked into a leather sleeve, was a thick sheaf of papers, folded in three. It was heavy, creamy-colored paper, the kind reserved for things of great importance. The top page read, "Last Will and Testament of Robert and Eleanor Fairchild." My parents. My breath caught in my throat. This was wrong. I shouldn't be reading this. It was a private, sacred thing. But the slap still stung my cheek. The years of quiet dismissals, of being made to feel less than, curdled in my stomach. The rules of privacy felt very far away. My hands, still trembling slightly, unfolded the document. The language was dense, full of legal terms that I barely understood. Hereinafter, testator, in witness whereof. I scanned through the initial pages, the standard fare about appointing executors. My parents had appointed each other, and Jessica as the alternate. No surprise there. I kept reading, my eyes flying across the pages, searching for the part that mattered, the part that divided the assets. And then I found it. Article 4, Disposition of Real Property. My eyes zeroed in on the paragraph about Fairwood Farms. The land, the old farmhouse, the new house, everything. The legacy. The thing my mother was so obsessed with protecting. My father had always told us, Jessica and me, that the farm would be split equally. "It's your birthright, girls," he'd say, his voice thick with sentiment. "Both of you. Equal shares." It was one of the few things that had always felt solid and fair in our lopsided family. But that's not what the paper in my hand said. I read the sentence once, then twice, then a third time, the words blurring and sharpening in the dim light. The legal jargon was a cold, cruel knife. It stated that upon the death of the second parent, the entirety of the Fairwood Farms property, including all buildings and assets thereon, was to be bequeathed solely and indivisibly to my sister, Jessica Fairchild Donahue. My name wasn't there. It was as if I didn't exist. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. The cold of the attic floor seemed to be seeping into my bones, a deep, internal chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake. An old draft. I frantically flipped through the pages, looking for a date. The last page. Signed and notarized. The date was there, stamped in crisp blue ink. It was from 10 years ago. Just after I had announced I was moving to the city to finish college instead of staying local and studying business like Jessica had. My mind reeled. 10 years. For 10 years, this document had existed. For 10 years, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every stilted phone call, they had been lying to my face. The promise of equal shares was a comforting bedtime story told to a child they had already written out of the book. But it was the next part, an attached addendum, a letter of intent, that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was handwritten, in my mother's elegant, sloping script. It wasn't in legalese. It was plain, cold, and clear. It is our solemn belief, she had written, that the continuation of the Fairchild legacy depends on the stewardship of a child who understands and respects the traditions and values upon which this family was built. The farm requires a steady hand, a commitment to community standing, and a life path that reflects stability and sound judgment. Jessica has consistently demonstrated these qualities. Chloe, while loved, has chosen a path of instability and transience. Her priorities are not aligned with the long-term preservation of our family's heritage. Therefore, to protect the farm from being fractured, sold off, or otherwise diminished by a lack of proper commitment, we have made the difficult but necessary decision to ensure it remains whole and in the capable hands of our daughter, Jessica. The words were like a punch to the gut. A path of instability and transience. A lack of proper commitment. This wasn't just a legal document. It was a formal, written declaration of my failure as a daughter. My entire life, all my choices, had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. The feeling of never being good enough, the constant, subtle pressure to be more like Jessica, it wasn't in my head. It was a codified family policy. A cold, hard fury began to burn through the shock. It was a clean, purifying rage that cauterized the wound of my mother's slap in the years of emotional paper cuts. They hadn't just disinherited me. They had judged me, condemned me, and erased me, all while smiling and passing the mashed potatoes. I carefully folded the papers, my movements precise and deliberate. I tucked the will and the letter back into the leather-bound ledger. I put the ledger in my empty suitcase. Then I methodically packed everything else. Not just the clothes I'd brought for the weekend, but everything. The faded t-shirts in the bottom drawer, the dusty books from the shelves, the tarnished silver track medals. I was excavating the last remnants of Chloe Fairchild from this house. When I was done, the room was stark, impersonal. Just a lavender room with a bed. I closed the suitcase. The click of the latches echoed in the quiet room. It was a sound of finality. I carried the heavy case down the creaking attic ladder, my rage giving me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I pushed the ladder back up into the ceiling, closing the door on that cold, dusty tomb of secrets. I took my duffel in my other hand and walked down the stairs. Not running anymore. My steps were heavy, deliberate, each one a hammer blow against the silent, waiting house. The scene in the living room was a tableau of suspended animation. The fight had sucked all the festive cheer out of the air, leaving a thick, suffocating silence. The fire in the hearth had died down to glowing embers, casting a deep orange, pulsating light on their faces. My father was staring into the flames, his shoulders slumped. Jessica and Mark were sitting stiffly on the sofa, not touching, not speaking. My mother was standing by the mantelpiece, her back to the room, one hand resting on the cold marble. The grand Christmas tree, with its hundreds of twinkling lights and gleaming ornaments, seemed to mock the ugliness of the moment. They all turned as I reached the bottom step. The sight of the two suitcases, my old hard-shelled one and the duffel bag, seemed to jolt them. "What are you doing?" my father asked, his voice raspy with disbelief. "I'm leaving," I said. My voice was eerily calm. The rage had settled deep inside me, a cold, solid core of certainty. "Don't be ridiculous, Chloe," my mother said, turning around. Her face was pale in the firelight, her eyes red-rimmed. The anger had drained out of her, replaced by a weary sort of exasperation. "You're emotional. We all said things we didn't mean." "Did we?" I asked, taking a step into the room. I set the duffel bag down but kept a tight grip on the handle of the larger suitcase. I think, for the first time in this house, we were all being perfectly honest. I walked over to the coffee table, a huge slab of polished oak that sat in the middle of the room. I placed the suitcase on it, the heavy thud echoing in the quiet. I unsnapped the latches, the sharp click-clack sound cutting through the tension. "What is this?" Jessica asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "More drama? Can't you just leave quietly?" "I could have," I said, looking directly at her. "I almost did. But I found something. Something I think we should all see." I lifted the lid of the suitcase. Lying on top of my jumbled clothes was the dark green, leather-bound ledger. I took it out and placed it on the table. The faded gold lettering seemed to gleam in the firelight. Fairwood Farms Estate Planning. I saw a flicker of something in my mother's eyes. Recognition. And fear. My father just looked confused, his brow furrowed. "What is that?" he asked. "I found it in a box of your old tax records, Dad. In the attic." I opened the cover and pulled out the thick, folded document. "It's your will." The color drained from my mother's face. My father straightened up, a look of alarm dawning in his eyes. "Chloe, you have no right," he started to say. "No right?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "I think I have every right. I have every right to know that the last 10 years of my life have been a lie." I unfolded the document and smoothed it out on the table. The stiff paper crackled in the silent room. "You told me," I said, my voice shaking with the effort of keeping it steady, "both of you, for as long as I can remember, that the farm would be split. Equal shares. Our birthright. That's what you said, Dad." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the document on the table as if it were a venomous snake. "It seems you had a change of heart," I continued. "Right around the time I decided to live my own life instead of the one you wanted for me." I looked at my mother. "You must have been so disappointed." "This is a private family matter," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "You are making a spectacle." "A spectacle?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You want to see a spectacle? Let's read some of this out loud. For the whole family to enjoy." I picked up the paper, my hand surprisingly steady. "Upon the death of the second testator, the entirety of the Fairwood Farms property shall be bequeathed solely and indivisibly to my daughter, Jessica Fairchild Donahue." I let the words hang in the air. Jessica's eyes widened, but there was a strange lack of surprise in them. It was more like the look of someone whose carefully guarded secret had just been exposed. Mark just looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight on the sofa. "So?" Jessica said, lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance that was so much like our mother's. "It's their property. They can do what they want with it." "Oh, I know," I said, my gaze still locked on my parents. "But it's the why that's so interesting. It's the part that really brings the Christmas spirit home." I picked up the handwritten letter. My mother took a sharp, involuntary step forward. "Chloe, don't," she whispered. But I was past listening. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too raw. I wanted them to hear it. I wanted them to hear their own cold, cruel words in the warm, cozy room they had built on a foundation of lies. I began to read my mother's elegant script. My voice was clear and cold. "The continuation of the Fairchild legacy depends on the stewardship of a child who understands and respects the traditions and values upon which this family was built." I paused, looking around the room. Jessica has consistently demonstrated these qualities. Chloe, while loved, has chosen a path of instability and transience. My father flinched as if I had struck him. Her priorities are not aligned with the long-term preservation of our family's heritage, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Therefore, to protect the farm from being fractured, sold off, or otherwise diminished by a lack of proper commitment, we have made the difficult but necessary decision to ensure it remains whole and in the capable hands of our daughter, Jessica. I finished reading and placed the letter gently back on the table. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound, than before. It was a silence filled with the weight of unspoken truths, of years of deception. The only sound was the faint, tinny music of a Christmas carol from a neighbor's house, drifting through the window. Silent night, holy night. It was a grotesque parody. So, there it is, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My entire life, summed up in one paragraph. I'm a risk. A bad investment. The unstable one. I looked from my mother to my father. You judged me and you sentenced me, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me. You just kept on smiling, hosting your perfect Christmases, and lying to my face. We did it to protect the family, my mother said, her voice stony. There was no apology in it. No regret. Just a cold, hard justification. The farm has been in this family for 5 generations. It is bigger than you, Chloe. It is bigger than your feelings. It is our legacy. Jessica understands that. You never have. The legacy? I shot back. What legacy? A legacy of lies? Of favoring one child over the other? Of emotional manipulation? That's a legacy you should be proud of, Mom. You've really secured it for generations to come. You always had to be so dramatic, she said, shaking her head. This is exactly what the letter is talking about. Your impulsiveness. Your emotional instability. You call this emotional instability? I cried, my voice finally breaking. I call it having a heart. I call it being a human being who is hurt when her own family betrays her. Robert, say something, my mother commanded, turning to my father. My father looked up, his face a mask of misery. He looked old, and frail, and utterly defeated. Eleanor, she's right. We should have told her. Told her what? My mother scoffed. So she could throw a tantrum like this 10 years ago? It was better this way. It kept the peace. There was no peace. I yelled, gesturing around the opulent room. There was just silence. Your silence, Dad. You stood by and you let her do this. You signed the paper. Was it just easier than standing up to her? He looked down at his hands, unable to answer. And in his silence, I had my answer. He had always taken the path of least resistance, and that path had always led straight to my mother's side, leaving me to fend for myself. Then I turned to Jessica. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. And you, I said, my voice dropping. Did you know? She hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. It wasn't my decision, she said evasively. That's not what I asked. Did you know? Her husband, Mark, cleared his throat. Jess, maybe we should just go. No, I said, taking a step toward the sofa. She can answer me. Did you know that for the last 10 years, our parents have been planning to give you everything and me nothing? Jessica finally met my gaze. Her blue eyes, so like my own, were cold as ice. Yes, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I knew. The admission, so simple and so final, hit me harder than the slap, harder than the words in the letter. She had known. All this time, through every holiday, every phone call, she had known. She had sat beside me, passed the gravy, asked about my life, all while knowing she was the sole heir to our family's world and I was the outcast. They told me after they did it, she continued, a defensive edge to her voice. They said it was for the best. To keep the farm from being sold off to pay for one of your projects. My projects? I asked, incredulous. You mean my life? My career helping people? That's what you were all so afraid of? That I might want to use my inheritance to do something good in the world instead of building a bigger house or joining a more exclusive country club. You see? Jessica said, appealing to our mother. This is what she would have done. She doesn't value what we have. She resents it. I don't resent this, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't even want it. Not anymore. I wouldn't take a single acre of this land if it meant I had to be a part of this family. The words came out, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that they were true. The fight wasn't about the money or the property anymore. It was about the truth. The contract hadn't enraged me because it cost me an inheritance. It enraged me because it revealed, in black and white, what I had always suspected in my heart: I didn't belong here. And I never had. I looked at their faces, one by one. My mother, righteous and unyielding. My father, drowning in his own weakness. My sister, my childhood confidant, now a stranger with cold eyes and a heart full of secrets. And her husband, an outsider who had been welcomed into the inner circle more completely than I ever was. The sweet smell of the house, the cinnamon, the pine, the lemon polish, was suddenly nauseating. It was the cloying scent of decay, of something rotten at the core. You can have it, I said softly. All of it. The house, the farm, the legacy. I hope it makes you very happy. I turned back to the coffee table and closed the ledger. I left it there, along with the will and the letter. Let them keep their precious documents. I picked up my duffel bag and closed the lid of my suitcase, snapping the latches shut. The sound was like a gavel, bringing the proceedings to a close. I walked to the front hall, my shoes silent on the thick oriental rug. I could feel their eyes on my back, but no one said a word. No one tried to stop me. What was there left to say? I pulled on my thin coat, my inadequate, bohemian coat, and wrapped my scarf around my neck. My hand was on the doorknob when my father's voice, choked and desperate, called out. Chloe, wait. It's Christmas Eve. I paused, but I didn't turn around. Not anymore, I said. I opened the front door and stepped out into the night. The cold was a shock, a clean, biting slap that felt like a baptism. It scoured the suffocating sweetness of the house from my lungs. The snow was still falling, thick, silent flakes drifting down from a black sky, covering the world in a pristine, unblemished white. I walked down the steps, my boots crunching in the fresh snow, not bothering to look back. The air smelled of winter, of pine and cold earth and the promise of a world beyond that perfectly lit house. I didn't know where I was going. Maybe a cheap motel down the highway. Maybe I would just drive until the sun came up. It didn't matter. As I reached my car, I finally turned and looked back at the house. It was still a perfect picture. The warm lights, the wreath on the door, the towering tree in the window. A sweet home. A place of love and family and cherished traditions. But now I saw it for what it was. A beautifully constructed lie. A cage gilded with nostalgia. I got in my car, the cold leather of the seat a stark reality against my back. I put the key in the ignition and the engine turned over with a low rumble, the sound of violation of the holy silence of the night. I didn't bother to wipe the tears that were now streaming down my cold cheeks. There were tears of grief, for the family I thought I had, for the home I had always longed for. But they were also tears of release. I put the car in reverse and backed down the long driveway. In my rearview mirror, I watched the house get smaller and smaller, its warm, inviting light shrinking until they were just tiny pinpricks in the vast, snowy darkness. I watched until it was gone. And then I turned onto the empty road and drove away, into the clean, cold, and uncertain freedom of the rest of my life. The first few hours were a blur of hypnotic white lines on black asphalt. The snow fell relentlessly, a swirling curtain that reduced the world to the stretch of road illuminated by my headlights and the faint, ghostly outlines of trees lining the highway. The radio was off. The only sounds were the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers and the low hum of the engine. Inside the car, the air was cold, the heater fighting a losing battle against the December chill that seeped through the windows. I welcomed it. The physical cold was a distraction from the icy hollow that had opened up in my chest. My mind kept replaying the scene in the living room, the words from my mother's letter echoing like a cruel chant. Instability and transience. Lack of proper commitment. They had used my independence, the very quality I had fought so hard to cultivate, as a weapon against me. They had twisted my desire to build a life on my own terms into a character flaw worthy of disinheritance. The injustice of it was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. After about 2 hours, the emotional exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, and my eyelids felt as heavy as lead. I saw a green sign glowing through the snow, Oakhaven, 2 miles. Gas, food, lodging. I pulled off at the exit, my tires rumbling over the graded asphalt. Oakhaven was a small, forgotten town that the interstate had mostly bypassed. Its main street was a string of modest storefronts, their windows dark, their Christmas decorations looking lonely and forlorn in the falling snow. I found a motel at the edge of town, a low-slung building with a flickering neon sign that read the Pinecone Inn. One of the letters in was burnt out, so it just said Inn. It seemed appropriate. I pulled into the empty parking lot, the snow already a few inches deep and completely untouched. I was likely the only guest. The lobby was a small, stuffy room that smelled of stale coffee and pine-scented air freshener. A stooped, elderly man with a kind, wrinkled face sat behind the counter, watching an old black-and-white movie on a tiny television. He looked up as the bell over the door jingled, his eyes taking in my tear-stained face and my hastily packed duffel bag. He didn't ask any questions. Just one night, he asked, his voice a gentle, gravelly rumble. Yes. Please. He pushed a registration card and a key attached to a large plastic pine cone across the counter. Room 7. It's around back. The heat's already on. The room was Spartan but clean. A double bed with a faded chenille bedspread, a small television bolted to the wall, and a window that looked out onto the snowy, empty parking lot. The air was dry and overly warm from the clanking radiator under the window. I dropped my bags on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence of the room was immense. For the first time in my life, on Christmas Eve, I was completely and utterly alone. The hollow in my chest ached with a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical injury. I had walked away. I had chosen this. But the righteous anger that had fueled my departure had burned itself out, leaving behind a landscape of pure, unadulterated grief. I curled up on the bed, still in my coat, and for the first time since I was a small child, I cried myself to sleep. I woke up on Christmas morning to a world of brilliant, silent white. The snow had stopped, and a weak winter sun was trying to break through the clouds, making the fresh powder sparkle with a million tiny diamonds. The room was cold. The old radiator had given up sometime during the night. For a long moment, I lay there, disoriented, the unfamiliar pattern of the ceiling and the thin, scratchy blanket confusing my senses. Then the memories of the night before came rushing back in a sickening wave. The fight. The slap. The contract. It was Christmas. A day that was supposed to be filled with the warmth of family, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls, the sound of laughter and wrapping paper being torn. My phone, which I turned off during the drive, lay on the nightstand. I stared at it, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Would they have called? Would there be a string of texts from my father, pleading with me to come back? Or just silence? I couldn't bear to find out. Not yet. I took a long, hot shower, the steaming water sluicing away some of the grime and exhaustion of the previous day. As I stood under the spray, I thought about Jessica. Her simple, devastating admission, yes, I knew. How could she have lived with that secret? How could she have looked me in the eye, year after year? The sister I had grown up with, the one I had shared secrets and dreams with in our adjoining childhood bedrooms, was a stranger to me. She had chosen the farm, the legacy, the inheritance, over me. The betrayal felt deeper and more personal than my parents' actions. They had always made me feel like an outsider. Jessica was supposed to be on my side. Dressed in a clean sweater and jeans, I felt a little more human. The hunger that had been absent for the past 24 hours returned with a vengeance. I decided to venture out. The old man was back at the front desk, a Santa hat perched jauntily on his head. "Merry Christmas," he said, smiling. "Merry Christmas," I replied, the words feeling foreign and strange on my tongue. "Is anything open for breakfast?" "The diner down the street. Peggy's place. She opens for a few hours on Christmas morning for folks like us. Travelers and strays." He gave me a knowing look, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with a radiator. Peggy's place was a classic American diner, all chrome and red vinyl booths. The air was warm and thick with the smell of bacon, coffee, and grilled onions. A few people were scattered around the booths, a couple of truckers, an old man reading the paper. A woman with a tired but kind face and a cloud of blonde hair piled on her head came over with a coffee pot. "Merry Christmas, Hon, what can I get for you?" "Coffee, please. And the number 3 special. Pancakes, eggs, bacon." The kind of comforting, uncomplicated food I desperately needed. As I sat there, nursing my hot coffee, the warmth spreading through my hands, I finally picked up my phone. I hesitated for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the power button. Then, I took a deep breath and turned it on. It buzzed to life, a flurry of notifications popping up on the screen. There were 3 missed calls. All from my father. And 1 long text message from him. My mother and sister had remained silent. I opened the text, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Chloe, please call me. Your mother is distraught. We were wrong not to tell you. This has all been a terrible mistake. Please, just come home. We can talk about it. It's Christmas." I read the message 3 times. Your mother is distraught. Not, we are sorry. Not, we love you and we made a horrible mistake. But an appeal to my sense of duty, an attempt to make me feel guilty for my mother's emotional state. And the final line, it's Christmas. As if the date on the calendar could magically erase a decade of lies and a lifetime of emotional manipulation. The anger, which had been dormant, flared back to life. A mistake? The only mistake they had made was getting caught. The document wasn't a mistake. The letter wasn't a mistake. They were calculated, deliberate choices. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry that I had found out. Peggy arrived with my breakfast, a heaping plate of food that looked and smelled like heaven. "Here you go, Hon, thank you." As I ate the fluffy pancakes, letting the warm maple syrup coat my tongue, I felt a new resolve hardening within me. My father's text wasn't an olive branch, it was a summons back to the same dysfunctional system. They wanted me to come home so they could smooth things over, absorb my anger, and eventually return to the status quo. They wanted me to forgive them so they could feel better about themselves. They didn't want to change. They just wanted the disruption to go away. I knew then that I couldn't go back. Not now. Maybe not ever. Going back would mean accepting the unacceptable. It would mean tacitly agreeing that their love and approval were things I had to earn by being someone I was not. I finished my breakfast, paid my bill, and left Peggy a generous tip. Back in my motel room, I looked at my father's text again. I thought about calling him. I could almost hear his voice, full of weary pleading, trying to broker a peace that didn't exist. But what could I say? What could he possibly say to fix this? The trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces. Instead of calling, I began to type a reply. My fingers flew across the screen. "Dad, I can't come home. This isn't something we can just talk about. The will and the letter weren't a mistake, they were a choice. A choice you both made 10 years ago. You chose to lie to me. You chose to value a piece of land more than your daughter's trust. Mom isn't distraught because she's sorry, she's distraught because I found out. There is nothing to talk about until you both understand that. I need some time. I don't know how much. Please don't call me again for a while." I hit send before I could second guess myself. A wave of both terror and relief washed over me. I had just severed the final tie, at least for now. I had taken control. The phone buzzed almost immediately. My father was calling. I watched his name flash on the screen, my heart pounding. Then, with a steady hand, I declined the call and turned the phone off again. I packed my bags, my movements calm and deliberate. I was no longer running away. I was moving forward. As I checked out of the motel, the old man at the counter just nodded. "Road should be clear now," he said. "Drive safe." "I will." "Thank you." Back in my car, the world felt different. The sun was brighter, the snow whiter. The road ahead was an open question. I had no destination, no plan. My 48-hour Christmas obligation had turned into an indefinite future. For the first time, there was no family home to return to, no expectations to live up to or fight against. The feeling was terrifying. And it was liberating. I pulled out of the motel parking lot and turned left, away from the direction of home. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was finally in the driver's seat. The rearview mirror was empty. There was nothing behind me but a blanket of clean, white snow. The days that followed Christmas were a strange, formless drift. I drove south, chasing a sun I hadn't seen in months, leaving the snow and the cold behind. I drove through the rolling hills of Pennsylvania and the flat plains of Ohio, stopping in nameless towns, sleeping in anonymous motels, and eating in roadside diners. I kept my phone off. The silence was a balm, a necessary quiet to allow the raw, screaming wound of my family's betrayal to begin to heal. In the quiet of the long drives and the solitude of the empty motel rooms, I began to process everything. I thought about my childhood, re-examining memories through the new, harsh lens of the contract. The times my mother had praised Jessica for her practicality while gently chiding me for being a dreamer. The way my father would quietly fund Jessica's expensive summer camps while telling me my desire to go to an arts program was an impractical fantasy. They weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a long, sustained campaign to shape one daughter into a suitable heir and gently sideline the other. The realization didn't make it hurt less, but it made it make a sick kind of sense. I finally ended up in a small coastal town in North Carolina, a place where the air was soft and smelled of salt and damp earth. I found a small, furnished apartment for a short-term lease, a block from the ocean. I needed to be still. I needed to stop running. I turned my phone on for the first time in a week. It was flooded with messages. Dozens of missed calls from my father. A handful of texts from him, each one more desperate than the last, begging me to let them know I was safe. And then, a single, surprising text from a number I didn't recognize, but knew belonged to my sister's husband, Mark. It simply said, "Chloe, I think you should know Jessica isn't as happy as you think she is. Be careful." The message sent a chill down my spine. It was cryptic, ominous. What did he mean? Be careful of what? Or of whom? I didn't reply. It felt like a trap, another move in a complicated family game I no longer wanted to play. But the most surprising message was an email. It was from my father's younger brother, my Uncle Ben. Ben was the black sheep of his generation, a carpenter who lived a simple life in Oregon. He and my father were not close, their relationship strained by the same family dynamics of expectation and disappointment that had ensnared my sister and me. The email was short. Subject: Your father called. Chloe, your dad called me. He told me what happened. He didn't tell me everything, I'm sure, but I got the gist. I'm not surprised. My father, your grandfather, did something similar. He pitted me and Robert against each other our whole lives. It seems some family traditions die hard. I don't know what you're planning to do, but if you need a place to land for a while, the door is always open. No questions, no judgment. Just a quiet place to figure things out. Think about it. Ben's words were a lifeline. The validation in them, the simple acknowledgement that this toxic pattern was not new, was more comforting than any apology from my parents could have been. He saw me. He understood. I lived in that small coastal town for 2 months. I walked on the beach every day, letting the rhythmic roar of the ocean wash over me. I got a part-time job at a local bookstore, the scent of old paper and fresh ink a comforting anchor. I started to feel the ground beneath my feet again. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was building a life, however small and temporary, that was entirely my own. I finally called Uncle Ben. We talked for over an hour. He told me stories about his father, my grandfather, a hard, unyielding man who believed his land was a kingdom and his children were either loyal subjects or traitors. He had favored my father, the more pliable, business-minded son, and had all but disowned Ben for wanting to work with his hands. The will had been a tool of control for him, too. It was a generational curse. Your mother just learned the game from the master, Ben said, his voice sad. And your father, he learned long ago that it's easier to be a pawn than to get knocked off the board. Hearing it laid out so plainly was both heartbreaking and liberating. It wasn't about me, not really. I was just the latest player in a long, sad family drama. My conversation with Ben solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to fight them for the farm. I wasn't going to hire a lawyer or contest the will. Doing so would mean engaging in their game on their terms. It would mean spending years mired in the very toxicity I had just escaped. The farm wasn't my legacy. My freedom was. I decided I needed to see them one more time. Not to reconcile, but to formally abdicate. To close the chapter on my own terms. I drove back north, but I didn't go to the house. I sent my parents and Jessica a short, clear text message. I will be at the old farmhouse on the property Saturday at noon. If you wish to speak with me, you can meet me there. The old farmhouse was the heart of the property, the original homestead built in the 1800s. It had been empty for decades, a beautiful, dilapidated ghost filled with crumbling furniture and memories. It was a neutral ground, a place that belonged to the family's history, not to my mother's curated present. I got there early on Saturday. The day was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The snow had melted, revealing the brown, sleeping fields of the farm. The old house stood on a low hill, its paint peeling, its windows like vacant eyes. The air smelled of damp wood and wet earth. I walked through the unlocked door. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight slanting through the grimy windows. I ran my hand along a dusty mantelpiece, over a deep gouge in the wood where my father and Ben had supposedly fought as boys. This was the legacy my mother was so desperate to protect. A collection of buildings and stories, held together by a fragile, toxic glue. At noon exactly, a car pulled up. It was my mother's polished black sedan. My mother, my father, and Jessica all got out. They looked out of place in their expensive coats against the rustic, decaying backdrop of the old house. They walked towards me, their steps hesitant on the overgrown path. We met on the sagging front porch. For a long moment, no one spoke. My mother looked at me, her eyes searching for a crack in my resolve. My father looked miserable. Jessica looked different. There were dark circles under her eyes. Mark's cryptic text echoed in my mind. "Chloe," my mother began, her voice softer than I expected. "We were so worried. We are so glad you are safe." "I'm fine," I said, my voice even. "I didn't ask you here to rehash Christmas. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to tell you my decision." I looked at all of them, meeting their eyes one by one. "The farm, the house, the money, it's all yours," I said, looking first at my parents, then at Jessica. "I'm not going to fight you for it. I don't want it." My father let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. "Oh, Chloe, thank God. We can fix this. We can draw up a new document." "No," I said firmly. "You don't understand. This isn't a negotiating tactic. I'm not saying this so you'll offer me a better deal. I am saying that I am walking away. from the inheritance, from the property, and from the expectations that come with them. You would throw away your birthright? My mother asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and horror. A birthright shouldn't come with conditions, I replied. It shouldn't be a prize for being the most obedient child. You turned it into one. So you can keep the prize. I choose my freedom. I looked at Jessica. I hope it brings you everything you want, Jess. To my surprise, her eyes filled with tears. It's not what you think, she whispered, her voice trembling. What is she talking about? I asked, looking at my mother. Suddenly, another car came roaring up the dirt lane. It was Mark's silver convertible, the top down despite the chill in the air. He skidded to a halt and got out, his face a mask of cold fury. What the hell is this, Jessica? He demanded, striding towards the porch. A family reunion you forgot to invite me to? His eyes landed on me. Ah. The prodigal daughter returns. Mark, please, not now, Jessica pleaded. Oh, yes, now, he sneered. He looked at my parents. Did she tell you? Did your perfect daughter tell you that our marriage is over? Did she tell you that this legacy she's inheriting is half owned by me, according to our prenup? And I have every intention of collecting. The porch was silent, save for the wind whistling through the eaves of the old house. My mother looked as if she'd been turned to stone. My father's face was ashen. Mark continued, a cruel smile on his face. She's been so unhappy, your perfect little girl. Trapped. Miserable. All she ever talked about was this damn farm, this legacy. As if owning it would magically fix the emptiness inside her. Well, Merry Christmas, Jess. You got your inheritance. And you lost everything else. He looked from her tear-streaked face to me. His text. Be careful. He was warning me. Jessica finally broke. Sobs racked her body. He's right, she choked out, looking at our mother. I did everything you wanted. I was the perfect daughter. I married the right man, I had the right career, I said all the right things. I won the prize. And I am miserable. I have been for years. I don't want this farm. I just wanted you to love me more. The confession, so raw and so broken, hung in the cold air. My mother looked at Jessica, truly looked at her, and for the first time, the mask of the iron-willed matriarch shattered. I saw a flicker of horror, of dawning comprehension. In her quest to secure the family legacy, she had broken both her daughters. I stood there, a spectator to the implosion of the family I had just formally left. It wasn't a victory. There was no triumph in their pain. It was just sad. A tragedy, generations in the making. I looked at my sister, my heart aching with a pity that surprised me. We were two sides of the same coin, both victims of a game we never asked to play. She had won by their rules, and it had cost her everything. I had lost by their rules, and it had set me free. Without another word, I stepped off the porch. I walked past Mark, who was watching the scene with a look of grim satisfaction. I walked past my parents, who were frozen in their own private hell. I walked back to my car. As I got in, my father called my name. His voice was broken. Chloe, what now? I looked back at the wreck of my family, standing on the porch of that decaying house. Now, I said, my voice clear and certain, I go live my life. And you have to live with yours. I started the car and drove away, down the long dirt lane, leaving the ghosts of Fairwood Farms behind me. The road ahead was still an open question, the future still uncertain. But for the first time, I felt no fear. I was not the unstable one. I was not the transient one. I was the one who had gotten out. I was the one who was free. And that, I realized, was the only inheritance that had ever truly mattered.